the ideas of science and held in a kind of hypnotic trance by the fantasy of the scientific approach to life. These people, however, are well integrated as a group. They are going on their way. They know what they are doing. Day by day they are expanding their knowledge and their skill, not all in a destructive direction, but too much of it in that direction. Against this highly organized program rises the voice of popular indignation, a strong dissent, but a dissent of peoples that have never actually formed one structure, but have spoken as individuals without even a general sense of common sympathy. They are not a solid pattern of conviction. They are merely fragments of fear, rising up in all parts of the world and asking some kind of peace in this time of trouble. This situation will not fit the times. And I think we are, as never before, in our spiritual emergency, faced with something that has always been one of our greatest difficulties. And that is that we have outgrown the sectarian concept of religion. We are in a condition now where we must begin to think in terms of one world religion. This does not mean that we must demand religious conformities, but we must divide between religious essentials and religious non-essentials. We must recognize the importance of a common unity on those levels in which our survival is involved. Perhaps what we need is something not patterned unlike the great political movements that are attempting world peace or attempting to maintain an uneasy armistice at this time. Just as it is necessary for the nations of the world to sit down together and try by every possible means to arbitrate their differences, so it is necessary for the religions of the world, with far greater justification than policy can ever have, to sit down together and recognize the spiritual emergency that is affecting the entire world, and that unless religion unites in this emergency, it will not only fail to contribute to the common good, but may very well destroy itself utterly. It is no longer a matter in which we have the luxury of our prejudices. It is now a matter of unite for survival. Not only for the survival of religious conviction, but for the survival of man under a way of life that can give him spiritual security, without which he cannot function. Man is a religious creature, and if he does not have the strength of his religion, his entire ethical structure loses tone, loses value. Now, we know these problems exist. We would like to do something about them. But most persons today are a little hesitant in daring to hope that anything on a world level will actually be done. If the conditions arising today and which certainly will become more and more intense in the next year or two, if these conditions do not point the way to what is necessary, we can have very little hope that the human being is capable of spiritual brotherhood. We must continue to assume that his religion is on his lips but not in his life. This does not mean that everyone is lacking in these qualities, but that the great formal structures upon which religious motion depends either lack the courage or the insight to sacrifice their own peculiar prejudices for the preservation of the essential principle of religion. It looks as though we were again going to be confronted with the problem of working out our own salvation. The individual, recognizing his own needs, must build his own religion, perhaps deriving it from the faiths familiar to him, perhaps not actually departing from the broad structure of prevailing religious teaching, but making certain powerful applications within his life and achieving in himself the tolerance which the world does not seem to be able to attain. So we may feel at the moment that as the crisis spreads, as the problem deepens, that the average person must begin to consider his own place in this world emergency. We read various accounts of what might happen and the tremendous potential destruction that could follow the use of atomic missiles. We also realize that the Holocaust proclaimed in these reports will have a tremendous effect upon our moral structure. Even the fear of it has already proved most disintegrating. But as the emergencies come closer, if they do, and we hope they do not, there must be ever more strength within the person to keep his own vision clear in the presence of situations over which he cannot personally exercise any general control. Here we have the second prong of our religious problem, and that is that among the great works of religion, perhaps the greatest, is to carry man through adversity. This is the final test of religion. For most people, religious integrity is measured by the ability of the believer to retain his own inner center of integration under the stress of circumstances. Thus, the religions we know must either be used to prevent trouble or to carry us in time of trouble. And both of these uses are valid. I think we must also generally realize that the atomic bomb, while it changes the pattern of our society, does not essentially change its hazards. Life becomes a little more dangerous. But this danger has always existed in some degree and to some measure. The life of the individual has always been in danger. Therefore, this is not the major consideration. The major consideration is that we have now the opportunity for a long and careful period of waiting in which our nervous systems become exhausted with anticipatory dreads. Instead of being able to rise to an emergency, we must face a long psychological depression of attitude and of resource. These things are harder to bear than the actual danger itself. Thus we need to integrate as far as we can our spiritual integration, or in our spiritual consciousness in this emergency. How are we going to go about it? What will be the problem of religion for us, perhaps for the next several hundred years, as we move more and more into this situation in which our skill can hazard every value which we possess? I think the simple answer for all these things is a series of deeply held, firmly believed acceptances. Man saves most of his energies by acceptance. By acceptance we do not mean compromise. This is not the point at all. But we must face most of the problems that we cannot solve with the thought that is expressed in the Bible. Suffer it to be so now. This too shall pass away. Therefore, what arises, what rises over the horizon of our experience must have a measure of acceptance. Today, we live in a world in which we will either spend most of our time worrying, being afraid, wondering, doubting, criticizing, or condemning, or else we must develop a consciousness of acceptance. Now, every negative attitude that we hold, every fear, doubt, and anxiety that we nourish is essentially bad for us. It is the same concept as that expressed in the Shakespearean play, that brave men die but once, and cowards die many deaths. The individual with an acceptance simply faces the fact. He brings to bear upon that fact all that he knows and all that he is, but he declines to dramatize it. He takes out of his entire concept of life the emotional superlatives with which he exhausts his own energies. Instead of saying that a thing is good or a thing is bad, the average person takes the attitude that it is awful, awful, awful good, or awful, awful, awful bad. Now, all these awfuls are a loss of time, a loss of energy, and a method of indoctrinating ourselves with a negative hypnotic technique. Now, I know that many people are so emotionally constructed that something has to be awful, awful, awful all the time, or they do not know how to live. But we're reaching the point where the world around us is producing so many intense situations that we can no longer afford to react to them with continually mounting tension, or we will disintegrate ourselves before the bomb has a chance. to meet this particular